Alrighty, everybody. It is currently Thursday, March 6th, 2025, and it's my fourth day of recording in a row. And to quote the athlete poet Scotty Barnes, I'm getting stronger! I'm closer and closer to reaching my final form every single day. And in the last episode, or in the last Sunday episode, I talked about how my final form is going to be Alex Jones, but I'm now realizing it's not Jones at all. It's Joe Biden. Joe Biden is my final form. It's Joe Biden, you know what I mean? Just an absolute buzzsaw, an unstoppable mumbling fool, right? People look at him like he's just a mumbling fool, but he was a buzzsaw. I think maybe Shane Gillis said that. So the entire, if any white man listening to this, any white man between the ages of 14 and 64 has heard that before, but it's true. Joe Biden is just a buzzsaw. He's kind of like Danny McBride. Like if you've ever seen Danny McBride in really anything ever, he plays the same character in anything. He's just like an absolute buzzsaw of fucking just bad ideas and shitty catchphrases, and I love it. I've started watching Vice Principals again, and he's the exact same in that. He calls everyone like Honcho, Hoss. I can't do a good Danny McBride, but you guys know what I'm talking about with that voice he has, with that kind of. I wish he would do Adam Sandler voice. That's the one thing. When people are like, "Oh, Adam Sandler just plays a retard and everything," yeah, and he's fucking great at it, dude. He's like, what's that movie? I Am Sam. He's like that. He's better than I Am Sam. I think I Am Sam is a worse representation of retarded people. I think Adam Sandler does it better than anyone else. He is their, he's their messiah, or it's like their Abraham Lincoln, right? Because Abraham Lincoln, he wasn't black, but he still freed the slaves in America and stuff like that. So I think Adam Sandler is like the retarded people's fucking Abraham Lincoln, and I think Joe Biden is he's the Danny McBride of politics, just an unstoppable buzzsaw, does the same thing no matter what. I feel like Danny McBride is like, we were talking about how like Joaquin Phoenix is an actor. If you don't know, I did an episode about him, but people describe his acting style as like he just they let him run free like a wild horse. Danny McBride's is kind of the same thing, but it's more of like a bull. You try to tell him what to do, and he just charges right through you with his own ideas. And that's what Joe Biden does, and that's why I admire him. That's why he's the greatest president we've had in the past, probably since Lincoln. He did more for black people than Lincoln. I think that's actually a Trump quote, though. But still, same person. They're the same person, just two buzzsaws, right? Like Obama in more than one aspect was not a buzzsaw. He could very easily be dominated. He was dominated by Big Mike constantly, and he probably still is every night. Good for him, some toe-curling anal orgasms from Big Mike. That's what Obama's doing. That's what he's got going on. But every president before, really, Trump was just kind of a pussy whipped bitch. And then we had Trump, and then we had Biden just come in out of nowhere, dude. Like Vince Carter at 45 years old hitting a fucking, what do they call that? Not a honey dip, where he like puts his arm halfway in the basket, like that type of thing. That's what Biden came in and did, just purely dominated him. Whether he actually won the election or not, who cares? He came in and he showed Donald Trump what a real fucking buzzsaw looks like. All right, he didn't play that game. He did play the game, but he didn't realize he was playing it. You know what I mean? Just an absolute beast. And unfortunately, Biden wasn't around to help with the Malayan emergency. In Malayan, it's not just a Jamaican guy talking about his lion who got out. Malayan emergency. There's an emergency with Malayan. I don't know. That was the only joke I could come up with Malayan, because it kind of sounds like a Jamaican guy saying Malayan. Malayan got out. Malayan got out and he's headed to Bob Marley's house to munch on his concubines. He's gonna go munch Bob Marley's concubines. Yeah. I don't know. That's the only one I could come up with. Malayan got out and it ate some big fat white tourist. He loved a white tourist. He got out. It's an emergency. I don't know. That's all I've got. But today's episode is about the Malayan emergency. And this one does kind of link back a little bit to one of my first ever ones, which was about the Rhodesian Bush War. This does kind of relate to that. It's a little known Anglosphere guerrilla war, which I find it interesting. It all started out with like Vietnam. Some people like the Civil War. I'm not the biggest Civil War guy, just because most of the people died of disease anyway, and that is in its own right very funny. So, I mean, there's the upside to that. In World War II, it's just too much, you know what I mean? It's like the Avengers of it. But Vietnam Vietnam's a little more of an art house film. Not as many people died, but it's still like a well-known thing. It's kind of almost like a Scott Pilgrim versus the world type of thing, where it's like a lot of people that like Scott Pilgrim are the most annoying people you've ever met, and they think it's like a unique like thing that they like, when in reality a lot of people like it. And Vietnam War is kind of the same thing, where they're like, no, I like the Vietnam War. The Korean War, see, that's the one. That's the actual one. That's the actual indie movie. You know what I mean? Scott Pilgrim, not an indie movie. Korean War is one. I can't think of like a movie equivalent for that. I don't know, like one of like those A24 movies they made in like 2017 that like 4 people have watched, including me. And I did watch an A24 movie recently called After Sun. It's pretty entertaining, pretty good. It's about this little girl who goes on vacation with her dad, and they just kind of, they fuck around. He's like, but the thing about the movie that, I don't know, I thought was funny, is that like, there's all these like, they always like allude to him like killing himself, but he never actually does it. Like every time you're like, oh, he definitely got that time. He never kills himself. It's wildly disappointing. And another like thing about the movie is that he was like, he had the kid super young, like when he was like 18 or 19 years old, and he's taking care of her, and they're on vacation and shit. And they show all like these, there's like these weird flash forward scenes to when she's an adult, and you know, it's kind of like there's this other part that's like linked into the flash forward scenes, which is almost like an interpretive dance underneath a strobe light. Look, like I said, nobody's watching this movie besides me, but there's this interpretive dance kind of thing underneath a strobe light, which ends with her like kind of killing her dad, but within the interpretive dance. And it's supposed to be like her like finally realizing that, you know, she's not her dad, and like her dad's not her, because she does end up having a kid even though she's a lesbian. Maybe, I don't know, maybe she gets some dick, or maybe the other girl gets some dick. I don't know how it works, because she's poor, right? So they didn't adopt the kid, so I was kind of confused about who got the dick. That would have been a fun fact that I would have liked to know. You know, throw a dog a bone, A24, all right? I want to know which lesbian got the dick, but I'm assuming it was her. She seemed more of like the freak bull in the relationship to me. And it would also make sense that she had a kid super young, kind of like her dad or whatever. But like the dad is like, yeah, he's not a great dad, but he's not that bad. He's like kind of a shitty dad. And it like ends with, the interpretive dance like ends with him killing her, or her killing him. And it's like, I get the point, but he's like, it could have been worse. I mean, and they're British too, so he really could have abandoned her. I don't think the British police are out here tracking dudes down to get child support, you know? If the fucking militarized American police can't do it, the fucking Brits in their bright-ass safety vests definitely can't. They wear construction vests instead of, like, real police vests. It's fucking weird. Speaking of British police, all right, it's time to get into the Malayan emergency. So we're going to start off with the causes first, and this one isn't as in-depth as the Rhodesian War one, just because fucking I did all the fucking research for it today. But some of the causes. All right, since the late 1700s, the trade and political sphere of Malaysia had been heavily influenced by the British. And you'll hear me say Malaysia sometimes. I think maybe that's me writing it down improperly. I think it's Malaya. And I think they changed the name to Malaysia after they gained independence from the British. And the majority of Malaysia came under British rule during the early 1900s. And so this is kind of like a North America type of thing. Like everyone views all the colonies in North America, like the 13 colonies, as one like big cohesive thing. When in reality, it was 13 separate colonies. Same thing with Malaysia. It was 13 separate colonies ruled by 13 separate guys. And even though now it's a country, at the time it was 13 like different colony states. So maybe it was one colony, but they were separate states that were kind of ruled independently. And that's like an important thing to know when we talk about the actual war. And during World War II, Malaysia and other Southeast countries came under rule by the Japanese Empire. So, I mean, that was one where they were probably like, fuck yeah, dude, finally we're getting free, you know what I mean? The Japanese are going to come in, they're going to show us a good time. And it was like, nope. It was like East Germany. Like East Germany went from like Hitler to like Stalin. It was probably like, oh fuck, finally the Ruskies are here to free us. Nope. Yeah, we're here to free you from Hitler so we could put you under the thumb even more. You think 6 million, or I guess 11 million was bad, dude? Up those numbers, quadruple those numbers. We're about to put on a fucking show here, you know? It was they came in and they dominated. It was kind of like when people were all excited about Patrick Mahomes after Tom Brady. Like Tom Brady like dominated the NFL for like 25 fucking years or whatever, and then Mahomes came in and people were like, "Fuck yeah, let's go, it's Mahomes." And now they feel the same way as they do about Tom Brady. You know, they view him the same. But Tom Brady never had like a fucking sick ass gay brother that was running around sexually assaulting chicks. So I feel like Mahomes gets the point there for me. I don't know. Call me crazy. But so they came in and the Japanese gave them what for. You know, they committed their own. If you know anything about the Japanese, they were committing some fun atrocities. You know, they were like, they were having fun with it. It wasn't like, let's put these guys into death camps and kill them all. They were like, fucking, how much of the human body's made out of water? Let's dry this dude out. Let's try out the crucifixion. They were going Mythbusters on it, basically. The Japanese came in, especially in China, and they started busting some myths. They were like, all right, we're going to see how much of the human body's water. That was like a big one. They just put a dude in an oven. It's like if the Mythbusters were given free reign to do whatever they want. That's what the Japanese were doing during World War II. And so this wasn't a fun time for Malaysia and other colonies and countries in Southeast Asia. And the economic fallout of the Second World War, both because of the occupation from the Japanese and because the British were in so much debt, left the colony with mass unemployment, low wages, and massively inflated food prices. So they were all kind of fucked. It wasn't a good deal. And this weak economy combined with labor unrest caused the formation of many unions. Like basically everyone at that point, not everyone, but like a lot of people, especially the people who were under like the British colonial, I don't know, like resource extraction type of thing. All of those guys unionized, right? And in addition to the unions, Communist Party membership exploded. And we'll talk a little bit about this later, but the Chinese ethnic group within Malaysia they were kind of the whole of the Malaysian Communist Party. Kind of, but not really. It's complicated. But between 1946 and 1948, communists in Malaysia planned hundreds of labor strikes. Like, I think they said in 1947 they got 300 off, dude. 300 strikes off. That's almost one every day. I'd be pissed about that too. I'd be like, come the fuck on. Like one day you're like, all right, they're off strike. Let's fucking go. We're back. We're going to get, our rubber or whatever we need. And the next day they're right back on it. That's just like the highest level of infuriating. Because it's like, you think it's over. You think it's finally over. You think you're almost done. And they get you right back. It must, it's Tom Brady going to the Bucs and winning the Super Bowl. It's like, all right, Brady's going to the Bucs. The Bucs have kind of fucking sucked forever. There's no way he's going to do it. And he fucking does it anyway. That's probably what it felt like to be them. They were just pissed as hell. And in response to these strikes, the British sent in the colonial police as strike breakers. And you might think these dudes were like just like grabbing dudes and being like, hey, cut that shit out. They were grabbing dudes, but they weren't just yelling at them. The colonial police would arrest, deport, and beat strikers often to death. And that was like a major thing. They would just like grab these dudes and like, I don't know how they were getting away with it. Maybe it's because they were the only ones with guns, but they beat a lot of people to death, I guess. And we're not talking about like, they had like shitty wooden clubs and shit, right? Like clubs made out of like shitty shit 2x4 material. So it was just like quiet thuds until you died. It was not a fun beating to death. You know what I mean? I would rather get beat to death with my fist or with fist, to be honest. And that's more of a warrior's death anyway. Like getting beat to death by like the police. That's not a fun. If you got like beat to death by like some fucking savage warriors, which I guess they were savage, but they weren't like warriors that were going out just like fucking shit up for the fun of it. They were, sent there by the colonial rule, which does kind of rub me the wrong way. If they were just like straight up beating dudes to death for fun, it's like I said with the serial killers. Like if serial killers are out here like just getting active, like just beating like big ass dudes to death with their bare hands, like I can respect that. But when you're doing it under colonial rule, I don't know. I can't respect it as much. I don't know what to say about it. And in response to this, communist militants began assassinating union breakers and attacking anti-union estates. And so I think what an estate is like these really rich people, like these really rich like colonial business owners. And so I think that's what an anti-union estate would be. But I think just in general, I don't think I don't think anti-union is, that's just like one piece of the puzzle there. I think a colonial like business guy, I feel like that kind of supersedes the whole anti-union thing. I feel like you got to kill everyone to get that done. It's not just the anti-union guys that are fucking you over, but I guess that's the way they viewed it. And the British used this to begin mass arrests of left-wing activists, as well as ending Malaysia's largest labor union. All right, I gotta slow down. So yeah, they saw all this. They started seeing these people getting killed and all this stuff. They were like, dude, why did you kill that guy? All he did was beat a few people to death, dude. It's not that big of a fucking deal. Why are you killing people? Now we have to, and they also deported a lot of people. And like I said, there was a pretty large Chinese ethnic minority. They might have been the majority, but they were definitely the majority of the Communist Party. And so a lot of them got deported as well. And so the British needed to maintain control of Malaysia so that they could use their tin and rubber to pay off their war debts. And at this time, Malaysia, the exports from Malaysia to the U.S. as payments for war debt was by far their largest. And so almost none of it was coming from like the actual like country of Britain itself, right? Like the fucking shitty ass islands up there. It was coming from these other shitty ass islands. And so that's why they had to maintain control, because they had to pay off war debts to the United States. And so the British planned to officially decolonize, but it wasn't like a real like, all right, we're fully getting out of here. You guys do your own thing. It was like yeah, we're gonna yeah, for sure, we're decolonizing. Yeah, it's like when people are like, yeah, we had a disagreement, argument's over, no big deal, and then they like quietly like take jabs at it for like the next like 20 minutes, and you're like, what the fuck? All right, the argument was over. We finished it. Okay, George St. Pierre is the GOAT. It's decided, and he's like, fucking, yeah, John Jones, longest title, right? It's like, shut the fuck up. That's kind of what they did. They were like, yeah, fucking, we're gonna end the fight. We're gonna decolonialize, but they were planning to install a government that was subservient to British rule and that would continue to allow these colonial business leaders to remain in there and to like get the tin and rubber. Those were the two big ones, which tin is one of those things where it's like, I thought we were done with that, and same with rubber. Honestly, I thought we figured out how to make rubber from like fucking oil or whatever, but I guess they were still getting it from trees at this point. So I thought we were done with tin is definitely the one I thought they were done with. It's like, what are you using tin for? We figured out that it's like poisonous as shit. I guess it was still like the 40s and 50s and stuff during this time, so it wasn't like they were like terribly concerned with the health of the general populace, and they still really aren't. Tin has been replaced by like fluoride in the water, like fucking red dye 40 or whatever. All right, and so that's kind of the setup for it. The British were kind of fucking these people over. Their country was also fucked, or the Malaysian colonies were also pretty fucked up, and I think Singapore was also a colony at this time, a colony of the British, but I think they gave it up like way later. I think they gave it up in like 2 years ago or something like that. I think it was a colony of the British for a really long time after that. And so the wars, the first shots of the emergency, and this is another thing, so it's called the Malaysian emergency. It really was like a war, but they called it the emergency for insurance purposes. That's so funny to me. It's like, even at like the highest level of like government, like the British Empire, it's still very powerful at this time. They probably, I don't know when like they, Australia became an independent country or whatever. I think it was somewhere around this time, maybe a few years earlier. And they still had like colonies all over Africa and stuff, but they were still dealing with insurance bullshit. It was still like, this whole thing was like a big giant insurance scam. So they had to officially call it an emergency. And I don't know. So I think that is very funny. But the first shots of the emergency were fired on June 17th, 1948. And the first shots were 3 European plantation managers were killed by suspected Chinese communists near the town of Sungai Sipat. And these Southeast Asian, it's just, all the languages are so, like Thailand, Vietnam. I don't really know about Cambodia, but I have to imagine. Same with like Laos and all that. Like all their fucking words are so like aggressive sounding. It's kind of like the German of Asia. It's like tam ga ga gao, that's all go go. It's like that. It's like just consonant after consonant. Like they don't even, the vowels are the shortest part of the word. Whereas in English, it's like, The vowel is the part of the word that you extend usually, but not there, dude. They're getting aggressive with the consonants. And so, and suspected Chinese, let's call a spade, dude. These were Chinese communists. Killed 3 plantation owners, and that's, yeah, they went Django on him. You know what I mean? They went Asian Django. They went Django. No, Django. They went Django Unchained on him, and they killed 3 European plantation owners. And this event led to the mass arrests and killing of Malayan communists and trade union leaders. So they saw that, and I don't know how like the trade union leaders got wrapped up in this. It's like dudes who are fucking carpenters or whatever. They were like, "You fucking piece of shit," and they were like, "What?" They were just confused as hell, and they just started, killing them and arresting them and also deporting them. And even the arrests weren't to like, like those fun prisons you see where it's like dudes playing basketball inside with like a broken milk crate or whatever. It was probably, these were like holes in the ground. That's where these Malayan communist leaders were going to. And fearing they were next, many left-wing Malayan activists fled to the jungles, and they kept the article, it was a Wikipedia page. The Wikipedia page kept referring to them as left-wing, and it's like, they're communists. I don't really get how all that works, because like a communist thing, most communist countries are like very socially conservative, but I guess they're referring to the left-wing aspect of the political leadership or like the political economic system, not so much the social side of it. Because like China is, technically I guess a left-wing country, but it's like super, super conservative. So I guess left-wing refers to the political economic side of it, not the social side of it. And so they all fled to the jungles. They were like, holy fuck, we got to get out of here. They hit the jungles. They just, they gumped out of there. They just, run, Forrest, run, Chin Peck. And Chin Peck is one of the real names, all right? So don't get mad at me, or it's something like that. And so they just hit the jungles immediately. They saw all this, and they were like, we're the fuck out of here. And the communist Malayans had been preparing for a war, but were still kind of taken by surprise. And I guess this event, it wasn't like a coordinated thing. I guess these guys were just like sick and tired of it, and they killed these 3 guys. So it wasn't like a Rosa Parks type situation where they sent Rosa Parks to go like sit on the bus and not move. I guess it was like the original Rosa Parks, which was just like, bitch, I ain't moving. Everyone thinks that about Rosa Parks. She's like this fucking sassy ass black lady, and it's like, no, she was like kind of like a corporate entity, like Subway in the Community show. She was like that type of thing. Like she was sent there specifically to do this. The original Rosa Parks, I don't remember her name, but she was like a teen bomb or whatever. And that was a real sassy ass black lady. She was like, man, I got 3 kids at home. I'm up on my feet all day. All right. Walmart makes me stand at the cash register. I ain't getting my ass up. That was the original Rosa Parks. And that's what these guys were. And so they were planning a war all along, but this event still took them by surprise, and the beginning of the war took them by surprise. And that's, we'll get to it when we talk a little bit more about the war. But on February 1st, 1949, Malayan communists led by Chin Peng, okay, so not Chin Peck, Chin Peng, formed the Malayan National Liberation Army, MNLA. And every time you hear like a militia group that's like the People's Freedom Fighters, they're not fighting for the people's freedom. The people are very not free under their rule. And I don't know if I wrote that down, but they weren't. But the MNLA was seen as a reformation of the Malayan People's Anti-Japanese Army. And the MPAJA, the Impaja, had been trained by the British and was disbanded in 1945. And even though the group was officially disbanded, many soldiers refused to turn in their weapons, and I think it said 4,000 of them were just straight up like, no, we're not even gonna like pretend to turn in our weapons or pretend to disband. We're gonna keep this thing going. And the guy Chin Peng, he wasn't like the leader of the Malaysian People's Anti-Japanese Army, but he was like an integral figure in there. And I don't know if he was like a soldier. I think he was more of like a political soldier, if that makes sense. Like people like look at generals now, like, I don't know, fucking General Mattis. I just watched the show Generation Kill, which is about the Iraq War. It's about Marines in the Iraq War, and they keep talking about this guy General Mattis. And generals, especially like modern ones, they don't really get involved in the war. They're more so just like kind of PR guys or something, right? They do coordinate, military things to a certain level, but they're not really like, all right, we're going to do this here, we're going to do this here. And speaking of the Japanese occupation of Southeast Asia, this is a little fun fact that I learned recently. If you know anything about the Pacific Theater, then you know about General Douglas MacArthur. And Douglas MacArthur was just like this absolute beast. And he was a leader. I think he was like the general of the fucking Allied invasion in Korea. And he was also the general of the Pacific Theater of World War II. And this guy was an absolute beast. He wore sunglasses and a fucking like a sailor's hat, but not like not like a Popeye sailor hat, kind of like that. But he wore like a sailor's hat and he smoked like a corncob cigar. And he fought the Japanese. He probably viewed the Japanese. I think he was like, these guys are like worthy opponents and shit, but he hated them and he fucked them up a lot. And he was also involved in Korea. And Korea was also occupied by the Japanese during World War II. And so they're not a big fan of the Japanese. And so these shamans in Korea, I guess that's what they're called. They're shamans, but they're kind of like priests. Not like Christian priests, but they're not like fucking waving fish bones and like fucking fern feathers over people. They're more like priests. And they view General Douglas MacArthur as their war god. And I learned that, and I was like, that's so fucking sick, dude. That they're like, this guy is a god of war. This guy fucked the Japanese up so bad, he has to be a god. And that's how they view him. And like, sometimes they'll pretend to be possessed by a spirit, and they'll put on like the hat he wears and like the sunglasses he wears and start smoking a corncob and be like, I'm possessed by a spirit. And I don't know, that was like a fun fact I learned that kind of is involved with this, and I just think that is very sick. All right. So we got the MNLA, and these are communist guerrillas. And if you don't know, a guerrilla war or a guerrilla fighting force is a kind of like a loosely made coalition of people that mostly work in ambushes and like just like quick. Guerrilla is a Spanish word that literally means small war. And so, yeah, they go out and they just do a little bit of shit and then they hit the jungles again. And so we're going to talk about the communist guerrillas. So the MNLA began the war by attacking resource extraction industries. So the tin mines and the rubber plantations, which were I just said the thing that I was going to say. So they were like fucking up these tin mines and these rubber plantations, going in there, blowing shit up. They were like cutting off supply lines and shit like that. And the goal of this was to bankrupt the colonial government. It's said to bankrupt the British Empire, but I was like, no way it's going to bankrupt the whole British Empire. I think it was to make this area specifically bankrupt to force the British to pull out, which, yeah, spoiler alert, they didn't really do that at all. And they were, like I said, a guerrilla force whose attacks were comprised of swift attacks on military, police, and infrastructure, followed by a quick retreat. So like I said, you just hit it and then you dip. You hit it and dip, right? It's like fucking a fat chick. You just go in there, you come right in her, what you think is her pussy. It really could be any number of fat folds on her body, but you just hit it and then you're the fuck out of there. So that's what they were doing. They were fucking a fat chick. And support and enrollment for the MNLA came mostly from the ethnic Chinese in Malaya. And I think it was like something like 90% of these people. And the ethnic Chinese who had just seen the revolution in China had no voting or land rights and were often very poor. And so if you don't know anything about the Chinese Communist Revolution, that's how Mao Zedong got that shit going. He like went out to the poor people. I don't know what they called it. It was like Mao's path through China, and he went to like all these super poor rural areas, and he was like, pick up arms and fight. We're going to become communists, and everyone's going to be equal. So this Chinese minority, I guess, they weren't like Irish people in America where it's like, yeah, you're Irish, but you're really American. I guess they were Chinese first. So I guess that's what they were doing. And so they saw that and they were like, all right, we're going to become communists and start fucking shit up. And the MNLA was supplied by the Minyun, which means the People's Movement. So it was very, very similar to the Chinese Revolution, but not nearly as successful. And the Chinese weren't fighting like a colonial government, right? The Chinese were fighting other Chinese people. And then, if you don't know, that's what Taiwan is. Taiwan is capitalist China, basically. Taiwan was just an island full of like native, like Aboriginal people who looked more like Filipinos and stuff like that, right? It was like a it was a native group of people. They weren't Chinese, and then the capitalist Chinese, another guy whose name sounds almost exactly like Ching Pek, or the guy's name was, I already forgot, Ching Pen, whatever his name. I think it was Shai Chek Ken, who was the capitalist Chinese guy. He went to Taiwan, killed all the native people, and then they set up shop there. So they really did, embrace the capitalist way. And I have to say, the MNLA didn't really embrace the communist way. They didn't start one giant like famine, or cause one giant natural, quote unquote, natural disaster like a drought or like a flood or whatever that killed 1 million people. They didn't embrace their way, and I'm kind of disappointed by that. They let Mao Zedong down. It's tough to say. But the MNLA was a loosely connected guerrilla force whose camps and hideouts are hidden deep within the jungle. And this is where people will like kind of draw comparisons to the Vietnam War, but it really wasn't the same at all. They didn't have nearly as many soldiers. Even as a percentage, they didn't have nearly as many soldiers as the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese and stuff like that. And I don't think they were as heavily supplied by the Chinese communists. Because at this time as well, like the late 40s, early 50s, China as a communist country was just starting to get the ball rolling. And so they probably didn't have the infrastructure or anything to supply these people. And the Russians definitely weren't getting down there. And also, we talked about this in the Rhodesian Bush War episode, but the Chinese and the Russians experienced what was called like the Russo-Sino split, which is where these two camps of communism kind of diverged, and they started funding their own groups. And I guess the MNLA was more aligned with the Chinese side, and so they definitely weren't getting any, or not like a ton of resources from the USSR at this point. And so propaganda created by the MNLA was spread mostly to poor farmers, and I don't know how the fuck they were printing this shit out, because at this time printers were still like fucking huge like industrial machines, like the shit you'd think it looks like you put a car together with it, but no, you're just making like a shitty like flyer or newspaper or something with it. But they printed a lot of that, and they were distributing it to these poor farmers. And a lot of it was them trying to like get the farmers to give them resources or like guns from the British or whatever. And originally the MNLA wanted to retake their land from the British government, but the war quickly devolved into a war of attrition in bodies, and so that's kind of where it is similar to Vietnam. And if you don't know, the Vietnam War, the reason, people say like the U.S. lost it, and the reason it's, was kind of some people say it was an unwinnable war, is because in conventional warfare, you just try to like take land back slowly and slowly. But that's not how the Vietnam War was fought, and that's not how this war was fought. It was fought by trying to kill as many of them as possible, and that's not really a good war plan. It doesn't work out right. Like if you control the land, then you control the people. Just trying to kill your enemy en masse. Even like the Vietnam War, I think it was like it was like some crazy high ratio of Viet Cong and North Vietnamese killed compared to the U.S. Army, but U.S. still had to retreat. We didn't lose the war, all right? Like they say, there's a fucking McDonald's in Ho Chi Minh Square, so who won the war? And this was the same thing, whereas like originally the MNLA was like, all right, we're going to take back all our shit from the British, we're going to fuck them up, get them to leave, we're going to run the mines and the rubber plantations, but yeah, didn't work out. All right, and now we're going to talk about the British and the Commonwealth. And this is where the Rhodesians kind of get tied into it, because all like the colonies of the British and the Commonwealth, which I guess is still a thing, like these formerly British colonies that didn't get their freedom by fighting for it. They got it just given to them by the British, because the British were like, all right, this is too much fucking work. Australia, yeah, you guys are mostly a desert. Here's your freedom. Isn't this so fun? We're giving you guys freedom now. We're giving it to you. It was that type of thing. And the Commonwealth still exists, I think. It's like this, I think more of like as a cultural thing, like the Anglosphere, right? Like countries that speak English. I think that's what the Commonwealth is nowadays. But back then, it was still the British and their colonies, even though they called them like protectorates, but it's still a fucking colony. And so their colonies included like Kenya, like we were talking about, Northern Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia, Nyasaland, Buchanaland, I think, was still a colony at this point, and a fucking ton of other ones. And all of them had to come and send people to help the British fight in Malaya. And so for the first 2 years, the British employed what they called counterterrorism tactics that included sweeps and deportations of suspected communists. And so it was like they were going house to house, kicking down doors, fucking like they were like, "Oh, you're gonna make a bomb with this fucking toaster, give it to us," and then they would just go make like their shitty fucking meals with it, you know. And so that's what the British were doing for the first 2 years of the war, so from 1948 until 1950. And this led to a sharp uptick in MNLA enrollment. And I imagine they were also mostly going after Chinese Malayans, and so that also probably led to why the MNLA was mostly Chinese. And the British planters and miners dealt with the brunt of these guerrilla attacks. And so while like the British like colonial fucking, what were they called? Like defense forces, security forces, whatever you want to call them, the police and the military basically, were going around like just like fucking shit up, grabbing toasters, grabbing fucking big ass woks, you know? They grabbed the frying pan. They were like, "I know you're going to try to bonk someone on the head with this. Give me that. Now you're going to China." And so while they were doing all that, the British planters and miners were basically kind of left not completely undefended, but they kind of had to fight for themselves. Because, like we were talking about, the MNLA was just trying to attack these industry centers to fuck them up, to cripple the British government, cripple their economy, so they had to pull out. You know, like a fat bitch, like fucking a fat bitch, you pull out. So that's what they were trying to do. And in 1950, Sir Harold Briggs was appointed to Malaya. And Briggs implemented a plan based on severing the ties between the MNLA and their supporters. And this is a solid plan, right? What they were trying to do to them, cripple them economically, they were basically doing to them. Obviously, the MNLA didn't have like these giant tin mines and these giant rubber plantations and shit. They were just like, you know, getting like corn and rice and like shitty fucking pork from these people. And they were their supporters, what was it called? The UN Min? What the fuck was it called? Whatever it was called. The People's Supply Force, whatever. I don't even remember. They were kind of coerced or forced into doing it by the MNLA. It was kind of like, "Oh, you're not gonna do it. I bet if I cut your wife's head off, then you'll fucking give me the goddamn rice." And so it probably wasn't a difficult thing for the British to be like, "Yeah, we'll protect you guys if you just stop giving them rice." Or they were like, "We'll fucking kill you if you keep giving them rice." That's probably what they did. And so these people were probably in a hard and a rock place, or a rock and a hard. Whatever. All right. And so Briggs' plan consisted of destroying suspected guerrilla food sources and the mass internment of mostly Chinese citizens. So they put them in what they called new villages, which were just internment camps. And I think they did 500,000 people total across all the 6 Malayan colony states, and 400,000 of those people were part of the Chinese minority, or the Chinese ethnic group. I don't know if they were a minority at this point. So they put them all in these camps, and the food sources they were destroying, they weren't like going out to just like any field they saw and like just ripping all the plants out of the ground. They had specific targets. Like they knew how the guerrilla forces were like growing their food and stuff. They would like, I guess, fly a plane or a helicopter and be like, "This field in the middle of the jungle, you see that? That's not how these people do it. All right, that's guerrillas doing that. Fuck that field up." And it was fairly effective. And the counterinsurgency plan was chiefly designed by Robert Granger Kerr Thompson, and he was a World War II vet who was well versed in jungle warfare. And I'm assuming he was like born in Malaya and all that shit, and he fought in Indonesia against the Japanese during World War II. And he was the U.S. equivalent of what he did was long-range reconnaissance patrol, and that's like a very specifically trained type of Marine. A Marine trained in LLRP or LRRP or LRP, I think is what they call it for short, which that's a very Marine way to do it. It's just, I can't get 4 syllables out. We're just going LRP, all right? And that's basically what he did, which is a commando. Think of like Rambo or whatever, right? They would just drop these dudes in the middle of the jungle, or they would be like, go deep behind enemy lines and fuck shit up. That's what this guy was trained in. And so he obviously knew what the fuck was going on. And so this tactic was very effective. And the second tactic we're going to talk about was also incredibly effective. And the British-controlled Malay states used their massive network of soldiers, police, and civilian operatives to coordinate anti-guerrilla efforts. And so obviously, like I was saying, the guerrillas weren't super well interconnected. They were kind of like these splinter cells that all wanted to fight for the same thing. That's what the guerrillas were doing. But obviously, like the British government, they had radios and fucking telegrams, whatever the fuck they're called. And so they could all communicate with each other. So it was like, all right, I got this piece of intel. I can get it right over to these group of people, and they're going to know what the fuck to do with it. It was that type of thing. And so that was another reason why they dominated so much. And the British used decentralized command, not like decentralized military command, but like each colony, they would just like get them the information. They were like, all right, let's go out, let's make our own plan, fuck shit up. It wasn't like one big guy at the center of it receiving the intel and then deciding what a certain group would do. The group would get the intel and then decide what to do, if that makes sense. So it was the group deciding how the mission was going to be carried out, as opposed to like one dude deciding for everyone. It was that type of thing. And so they would use this to order missions based on the intelligence they got from military, police, and citizens, right? And so the police or whatever would be like, we saw a bunch of guys carrying some big ass bags into the wood. I think they're either carrying rice or guns. Either way, probably not good for us. Go get rid of them. And so that's what they were doing. And the second major tactic, or I guess maybe third at this point, that allowed them to win the war was Agent Orange, and other herbicides were used for the first time really ever in order to destroy crops and foliage that the Malayan guerrillas would use as cover, right? So if you're flying a fucking helicopter over some shit, even though you have the helicopter, you can't see through the fucking woods, right? And if you want to destroy a field, then you have to like go down into the woods or whatever. But at this point, they were using, what were they called? Like Vanderkamp vampires. I don't know what they were called, but they were using these jets to drop Agent Orange and these other herbicides, just completely fucking, if they thought there were some guerrillas there, it was like, all right, we're not going to send dudes in there to just get ambushed by these people. We're just going to destroy all their shit, and then we'll send dudes in there. And that was a very, very effective tactic. And the other thing they used, if you know anything about the Vietnam War, then you know about Agent Orange. And Agent Orange isn't like outright like harmful to humans. It's more of like it causes like cancer and birth defects and things like that, right? So it's not gonna like peel all your skin off or like immediately you're gonna get a big ass tumor on your arm, but over time it'll do that. And so they used Agent Orange and other herbicides, and these other earlier herbicides, if you want to take a guess, were as effective, but they were worse than Agent Orange in the way that they like fucked with the human body and like caused birth defects and shit like that. And so that was their other major strategy that allowed them to win. And the British vastly outnumbered the MNLA soldiers in terms of, just in terms of like who had more soldiers. So the MNLA did have like, they said they had like 1 million supporters and stuff like that. And so technically they had a lot more supporters in Malaysia, but the British is a colonial force, right? And so they have all their supporters aren't in Malaysia. They're all, spread around the Commonwealth and in the British Isles and stuff like that. So even though the MNLA technically did have more supporters during the war, who really did? These shitty fucking Chinese communists that weren't even really getting support from the Chinese or the largest empire in the world. I'm gonna let you guys figure that one out. That one was a brain teaser for me. I couldn't get it, but I think you guys might be able to. And so, yeah, they were fucking shit up. And in addition to the Malayan and Commonwealth security forces, the British hired thousands of Iban mercenaries. And the Iban mercenaries were effective, but they were very controversial. And what the Iban is, it's this, I guess, the specific ethnic group in Borneo, which, if you don't know, Malaysia is partly on the Malaysian peninsula, but they also have, like, a certain amount of territory on the island of Borneo, which is, like, that big-ass one in Indonesia. I think it's the biggest one in Indonesia. I think it's one of the biggest islands in the world. And so the Iban are an ethnic group from there, and they were known as headhunters, and they were cutting off scalps and shit, and this quickly got back to the main British Isles, like the newspapers and stuff there. And I guess, like, the newspapers were like, dude, they're hiring these fucking savage mercenaries that are cutting off people's heads and stuff, but the British people were like, no, cut off they're dissenters. Cut off all their fucking heads right now. So they didn't give two fucks. They were fine with the Iban cutting off people's heads. And the Iban, they weren't given automatic weapons, because they thought that they would revolt against the other ethnic groups and stuff in there, because obviously, like we talked about with the Rhodesian Bush War episode, the we as like Americans, and specifically like people within like the Western point of view, look at them as all like, oh, they're all Malaysian, when in reality it's not like that. And also they didn't like the white people either, so it was just, they were like, we're just not going to give these guys automatic guns. And they weren't like the best trained soldiers, but they were really good at traversing the environment and surviving in the jungle and shit like that. And eventually they were given like their own regiment called like the Sawatak soldiers. And also the British had some of their best like Commonwealth soldiers here. Like they had the Rhodesian SAS, which if you don't know, the SAS is the Special Air Service. These guys are kind of like I don't know, they're Navy SEALs, I guess, of the British. And the Rhodesian SAS were an extension of that, and they were considered just as good as the British. And then they also had the Gurkhas, which is still a thing that exists to this day. And what a Gurkha is it's like these dudes from the Himalayas that basically become Navy SEALs, but they're all like Nepalese or like North Indian, like people from these super high altitudes. I don't know if that's like a strategy or something, but sorry if you had to hear me sniffing through my nose, but whatever. No one's listening. But these guys were very effective soldiers, and they're still some of the best in the world. And I think I don't know how this works, but the Gurkhas are still part of the British military. So I guess it's kind of a thing where it's like you can join if you want. You know, nobody's getting forced to join anymore. But they're very elite soldiers. So some of the most elite special operations groups were in here, right? These weren't like conventional, like fucking, what do we do, sir? These were guys that were very well versed in warfare, fighting in this war. All right. And so I'm not going over like the exact details of the fucking war or anything. Like I said, this is my fourth day of recording in a row, so it's whatever. So we're going to talk about the end of the war. And most of the war was just like these quick, swift attacks. There were also a lot of massacres on both sides. A lot of people were killing a lot of civilians. The civilians were really the ones that, it's not like a thing where it's like either side got fucked that bad, but the civilians got it the worst of anyone, really. And as we'll talk about the casualty rates, they got it bad. But in the end, in 1960, after nearly a decade of negotiations and temporary armistices, the war officially ended. The war had effectively ended in 1958, but the British maintained their state of emergency for 2 more years. And I don't know how this worked, because at this time, Malaya was an independent country. So I don't know how the British, like I said earlier, they were like maintaining their government there, even though they gave them independence, or that was the plan. And so they probably just executed that plan. They were probably like, all right, we're fucking these dudes up so much, let's just put our puppet government in and get the fuck out. And so approximately 7,000 MNLA soldiers were killed, with 1,443 British personnel killed, and that includes like police officers and stuff like that. 1,346 Malayan security forces, which these guys are people that are from Malaysia and stuff like that. And I think they included the Commonwealth number in the British number. But you know how people are like, when we talk about like the Vietnam War, or the Iraq War, the Korean War, or Afghanistan, or any of those things, and all these other countries are like fucking, or like Britain specifically is like, we did it, we went in there, we helped you guys too, we fucking went in there with guns and we helped you guys, we helped gun down those Pakistanis. I'm not gonna say what they call them, even though I don't know, it's one of those slurs where it's like, is that, they call them Pakis, which is just, I guess technically, but it's like tranny, right? It's like, that's just a shortened, I guess it's just, I guess if you want to take offense to it, you can, but it's not one of those ones that really strikes me, you know? It's not like a new word. Like, the slurs that are like completely new words that they invented, I'm like, all right, that's a slur. But like a shortened version of another word, I'm going to take a controversial stand here like I always do. I don't know. It just doesn't ring the same to me. You know, it's just like, it's lazy. It shows to me that you aren't really like a true bigot, which I can't embrace that. I can't, if you're like really racist and you're like, you know, getting out there, or you're like really bigoted in some way or another, you really hate a group of people, that you're inventing new words, I'm like, all right, I can at least respect it. But yeah, I can't respect these other slurs. It's just the way it is. But like I said, the civilians got it the worst of anyone. Approximately 2,478 civilians were killed by both sides. and 810 were recorded missing. So we're going to add that to the number. So about 3,200 civilians, almost 3,300 civilians were killed during this war. There was lots of massacres and shit like that. And Malaysia gained independence in 1957, like I said. And then a second Malaysian emergency would occur between 1968 and 1989, but this one wasn't nearly as big. I think like 2,000 dudes died total. And that's it over the course of 21 years. And that's like, as an American, I'm like, fucking like 2,000 people died. That's chump change for a guy like me. That's a year in Chicago. That's 2 years in Chicago, dude. That means nothing to me. I just can't respect that one. That one definitely wasn't as big of a war as this one. But yeah, the communists ultimately failed in their attempts. They really got dominated by the British and the police and all that shit. And yeah, 4 days of recording in a row. I don't know. I think if I tried this when I first started, it would have been significantly worse. So yeah, can't be too mad at that. But spring break, we're leaving tomorrow. So yeah, it's the end of this episode. Hope you have a good day, good week, good month, good year. And I'll see you guys, on Wednesday. And I don't know, that Wednesday is 2 weeks from now, so I don't know what I'm doing. But yeah, have a good one. Peace.